told me she saw this guy and watched this guy while I was still pitching the book. She got excited and basically ran out of the room. There's something here. Flew to Seoul, Korea. He said at one point, Jim, do you know who Doug reminds me of? He went, me. It reminds me of my childhood. Oh,
Wow.
that meant everything.
Alright, so today's a very special episode of Wrangle's Angle. Normally on this show, I like to give my angle on things. Things like Mexican wrestling, or bargain bin stores, and in most cases, food. But today's episode is going to be a little different. If you don't know me by now, you know that the reason I make videos is my love of television. Ever since I was a kid, especially shows like game shows. In fact, in 2022, I even got to interview the host of one of those game shows I used to love, and that was Greg Lee, host of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. But to introduce today's guest, we got to talk about another genre of TV I watched a lot of growing up. One that I don't give nearly as much credit as I should, and that is cartoons. Over the course of history, it seems like animation has always played a big part in the entertainment industry. Whether it's on TV or at the movies, for kids or adults, animation has a very rich history. But a part that doesn't get enough attention, the cable TV era. In 1992, the genre got its own cable network, featuring a sizable amount of existing franchises acquired by Turner Broadcasting. But about a year earlier, another cable network with a decade under their belt made a bold, risky move, debuting 3 animated series they produced themselves. You see, for a while, every animated program on Nickelodeon was acquired from an outside company, as original programming can be expensive. But one day, Nick decided to go for it, and the rest is history. Here's a man that created one of those shows. A man who was there since the founding of the very network that changed my life. Which I guess makes for an interesting story of when he jumped ship to the other company, Disney. Here's the man who is and created Doug Funnie, and lots of other shows too. His name, Jim Jinkins. Alright, so let's get started. You're from Virginia, right?
Richmond, Virginia.
Would you say it's an exciting place to live?
I would say it was, in many ways, the answer is yes. We lived in the suburb, and so we had the magic of running off into the woods and making up stories. You can play, kick the can or football or whatever with your friends, ride bikes. So I felt like we, as a kid, we had the best of all worlds.
Right. Let's get it out of the way. Is Richmond, Virginia, what Bluffington eventually was based on?
Yes, I'd say loosely based. I mean, I was knowing we were going to talk, started looking at stuff that's ancient now. But this is the first Doug production Bible.
Oh, wow.
I drew maps, and it shows the map of the Tri-County area.
Oh, wow.
A map of Bluffington, and that's really
Oh, you actually mapped it out? Wow.
Lucky Hills, which is Doug's neighborhood. And
Right.
It's fun for me to visualize it. But also you give this to your layout people and the writers. Every time Doug walks out his front door and he's going to go to Mr. Dink's, he's always going to turn the same way. A lot of it comes out of Richmond, memories of it. Not precisely, but if you're from Richmond, you got to get an extra.
And you are Doug, right?
Yes. Doug was the exaggerated, cartoony version of my memory of being a kid.
Since you worked on a lot of children's programming, what type of kid were you?
Wow, what a big question. I felt like I spent a lot of time. I grew up in the pre-computer everywhere, world. As wonderful as computers are, it really pulled me outside as it did all the other kids. And I think that was a good time to grow up. I would say I was neither the most shy, whatever person, and definitely not the, follow me guy.
Right.
Somewhere in the middle, definitely how Doug was played. There's sort of, he's in the mix. He does some things really well. He's surprised more than anybody about that. He's got hidden talents and gifts. It's up to mentors and others for him to discover them.
What type of shows were you watching when you were a kid?
Well, my parents were fairly restrictive about what I could watch and when. During the school year, if you made acceptable grades, you got a half an hour a night. Of course, that was excruciating for me because I picked my favorite show, which was an hour long, and watched the first half hour of it. And then I had to go and stop begging, please, trying to draw them into the plot.
Let me just tell you, being someone who grew up sitting in front of the television, I cannot imagine, Jim. I cannot imagine, but I know you did say, though, that on Saturday mornings, that's when you would watch a lot of stuff, right?
And I'll add to that.
Yeah.
Came, all bets were off. Just you can watch TV, do whatever you want that way, within reason. The weekends as well.
Name some shows you used to watch.
The Flintstones, Rocky and Bullwinkle, which I suspect some of the jokes were flying over my head. All the Bugs Bunny, Warner Brothers cartoons. I mean, I just thought all of that stuff was the best.
I watched a lot of that stuff, too. Nickelodeon was very good at even some of the classics they would show. I watched all that stuff. Another thing that stood out to me was, like Doug, you were somebody that enjoyed drawing.
Yeah, I always thought of myself as a doodler. A doodler with a short attention span, perhaps. And so often, when the teacher was giving their lecture or whatever, they might walk up and down the aisles, look over my shoulder, and see a bunch of cartoons. Most of them were not happy. But some, like, say, Miss Wingo, she saw something in that. And I think she understood something about how it was helping me. That was a rare thing.
Are you a self-taught drawer? Or?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, I say that. I started taking art in school and majored in it in college.
Your love of art came from you just trying to focus, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Is it? Yeah. Let's talk about Mad Magazine.
Yes, let's talk about it.
Yeah. But evidently that played a very big part in you learning how to draw, though, right?
Yes, if you're like Doug's age, Mad Magazine was it was a magazine that, as a kid, you feel like you're getting away with something, looking at it and laughing at the jokes. By today's standards, it's pretty tame. And some were amazing caricatures, some were just crazy cartoons. That was really inspiring. Me and my best friend would trace things to learn how they drew their stuff.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that played a big part in your life and your future career was Sesame Street, right?
Yeah. Well, you know a lot.
Oh, thank you.
A new show came out when I was in high school. Although it was for really young kids, I thought I would check it out. And it had cartoons and music and all that. But my favorite thing on it were nerds. And I just thought, oh, that's what I want to do. Because those puppets and being funny on TV, I thought that's it. So that was sort of a beginning of a path, even though I didn't really know it at the time.
Eventually you ended up at Ohio State University and your major was art. This is where things start to get interesting. You eventually met someone that would kind of, I think, change the course of your career. Can you tell that story?
You have done great research.
Oh, thank you, Jim. All those years of watching TV, finally paid off.
Warner Communications decided to come to Columbus to test a new thing which would provide 30 channels of programming. And one of the channels was a channel just for preschool kids called Pinwheel. But I had this chance meeting. I had a part-time job in a library and a fabric store. Overheard a conversation with a guy in front of me in the checkout line, and I could tell he was working on that show. And I just jumped in front of him and just said, I will do please give me a break. And he went, come on over, I'll let you meet some of the people. The executive producer, Sandy Cavanaugh, and they hired me to work on Pinwheel, painting set and props and all that. And that's how I got into working on a show, learning that these people had come down from New York. Many of them had come from the Children's Television Workshop, a show called The Electric Company.
Children's Television Workshop is the company that was responsible for Sesame Street. But can you describe what Pinwheel was to maybe some of my viewers that maybe, don't know what that is?
It was a show similar to Sesame Street, and it was a comedy show that was structured similar to Sesame Street, but it was not teaching numbers and ABC. It was teaching more social and emotional learning. And at the time, I'm telling you, it was on all day and all night. They just reran the shows and we made them.
Pinwheel went back to New York. Pinwheel left Ohio. What happened?
Well, those folks, when they finished, went back to New York, and I felt stranded. But I continued to work in Ohio a very hard winter, and it was very bleak in many ways. Those executives went back to New York and went, that was a great show. What if we made a network of shows? And why don't we call that network of shows Nickelodeon? I got a call from them saying we need you to come to New York to make the New York version. Mm-hmm. So that was how I got pulled to New York, the epicenter of cable television. Cable television exploded. So now there's work, other children's shows, grown-up shows, commercials, all kinds of stuff was going on, and it was happening in New York City just as I arrived.
You were one of Nickelodeon's first employees. That's huge, in my opinion. That's huge. You know, I think the reason I make videos is sitting down watching Nickelodeon. I remember saying to myself, "Oh, those guys probably have the best job ever."
Yeah, the answer is yes. I thought it was. It was a place that was open to ideas coming from wherever, and it was exciting. You're doing some shoot, you need a plan fast, and you run out to the waiting room of some executive's office and grab it.
How would you describe to I'm a child of the '90s that maybe didn't get to see what Nickelodeon started off as? How would you describe their programming?
They were searching for their identity. In the beginning, they were trying to figure out, I guess it wasn't edgy.
Did you spend the entire 1980s at Nickelodeon?
The 1980s was a mixture of, I was a freelancer doing many things with them. But that meant you were free to go work on other people's shows and pilots.
Okay.
It was a very exciting time to be in New York, but I was doing lots of different programs. I was got into production designer, and then eventually got into directing and producing.
Before we get to the creation of Doug, the best example of the freelance jobs Jim was doing for other people are these commercial spots he did for the USA Network and the Florida Department of Citrus. Wait, doesn't that character look a little familiar? And production designer for the rare 80s TV show, Dr. Fad. Then, by now, Nickelodeon went through a series of changes. Like, they weren't trying to be an educational channel anymore. Well, not as much as they had tried in the past. And thanks to the success of shows like Double Dare and You Can't Do That on Television, Nickelodeon had a much better understanding of what they were going for, giving kids what they want. And also in the late night hours, they even gave the adults something they'd want to watch too. But I digress. This is obviously the exciting part right here. How did you come up with Doug?
I would say Doug was one of the least self-conscious creations. You know, one like I went, I'm going to create a show. Back in this freelance time we were just talking about, I had a very small New York apartment. So when I'd get home from whatever job I was working on, that I was doodling every night. There was a character that popped up out of that, eventually named Doug. Represented me in my thoughts. Yeah, some of them were funny, but some of them were dark, depressing, vulgar. I showed it to a friend of mine, and I showed him all this, and he said, you ought to turn that into a book. Oh, Doug got a new pair of shoes.
You said book, though, but why didn't you think, oh, this is a TV show right here? Why didn't you start off as a show? Not that getting a show is that easy, but...
Right, exactly. You just said it. It's like, that was so beyond I was a pretty good dreamer.
What was it like pitching Doug to publishers?
I was rejected by the very best. I'm going to show you a visual aid now.
Oh, that'd be great, please.
That's
the same exact one?
Yep, this is it. And this shows the main characters of the story, which really were pretty solid. I mean, you might recognize those characters. I was showing this around to the publishers. This just did not sell. I thought we had sold it to one company, but that book editor left just as he said yes.
Yeah, that was at Simon & Schuster, right?
Yes, you've done your work.
Oh, thank you. You said you were rejected by the very best. I know you said you're a dreamer. You're like me. Did you ever think to yourself, oh, come on, everybody's gonna want this?
When you pour yourself into a project, you pour your soul into it. You feel just like you just said. The world won't be complete without this.
Yeah.
And you have to feel that way and believe that and then deliver on it. It was a low point because you think it happened. This is the contract right here. They're talking about a book tour here. So when it was canceled, it was heartbreaking. But there were other things going on. So it wasn't despair like that nothing else was going on. This felt important.
The good thing is that 2 weeks later, you got a phone call from someone.
Yes, all these freelance jobs paid off because one of my dear friends from working on the pilot ship called me. Her name is Linda Schuster. He told me about Nickelodeon starting a new division called Nicktoons. They were looking for original artist-driven ideas and took this piece and went over and I met the head executive at Nicktoons, Vanessa Kaufman. She later told me she saw this guy and watched this guy. And that's when she got excited and basically ran out of the room while I was still pitching the book, which was disturbing. But she ran out to ask her boss, I want to take this guy to pilot. There's something here. It was in her gut. She heard and saw something that he wanted. So they ended that first meeting. They said, you're going to make a pilot. So, we had to get our animation friends together.
What was making the Doug pilot like?
I don't know that there's anything more exciting than watching a team of people who were all in New York, a film that was being made by hand. The director, Tony Eastman, it was in his loft apartment. Camera there, big animation cameras. The artists were there, and so we were working with. But at the time, it was just this wonderful little 8-minute story called Doug Can't Dance that has this really tight beginning, middle, and end. Sort of was not an introductory story as much as it was a story about a kid getting ready to go to the dance. It tested, some say it was the highest score of any of the pilots. Based on making that and its testing, that's when they picked us up.
The voice of Doug in the pilot and in the Nickelodeon series was Billy West. How did you get him involved?
Small world stuff. Right before making this pilot, I was working as a director and producer of several shows on the Comedy Channel. And a guy named Billy West, he had been doing radio in Boston, and he had just moved to New York. He was doing some guest spots on various shows, including one of our shows, The Higgins Boys and Gruber. He was just outrageously funny, had a zillion voices.
I wasn't able to find any footage of Billy West on The Higgins Boys and Gruber, but here's some shots of him appearing as various characters on Howard Stern's syndicated TV show around that same time.
The voice I was hearing in my head wasn't exactly the one Billy West thought would work, but we used it. That's the one that's on this pilot. And after we got picked up for the series, I told Vanessa Coffey, well, we'll probably recast the voice of Doug. And Vanessa went, no, you're not. That character is what the kids love. That's why we're wanting to make this series. You're going to be going with Billy. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it was just one of those wonderful moments where it wasn't like I knew everything to do, and I had great help.
How did Fred Newman get involved?
Fred is one of those early Nickelodeon stories. While we were making Pinwheel, Fred got hired to make a kind of a talk show for kids called Livewire. He was the host of that show. And so we would crisscross. And that's where we got to know each other and became quick friends. And he was working at the Mickey Mouse Club.
For the other company.
Yeah, and was telling me all about it, showing me clips that were hilariously funny. And so when Doug was happening, I talked to Fred about doing a number of the characters for the show. The sound of the music of Doug is part of the storytelling. We did not just have a library, but every show was scored specifically uniquely for that story.
Yeah, we'll talk about the music right now, actually. I still remember being a kid thinking the music was awesome, but I remember there was like that one day, like in the background you hear that chicka chicka pop pop, and then you're a kid and you're like, wait, that's literally just somebody making noises with their mouth, you know what I mean? I don't know if it would have been the same show without it.
I agree. When I watched Fred come to the studio, of course he had an enormous range of sounds that he could create with his mouth, but he's also a singer. And so a lot of this stuff I'm describing had a rhythm and a pitch to it. It was a brilliant collaboration. I'm not a musician, so what I would do is listen to music, and then Dan would listen to it, and I'd explain, why did I pick that? Not the whole song, the guitar. And I said, that's a great sound. And Dan would hear that and know that that would be a great way to go. So it was a great collaboration.
Sure, and finally, the voice of Patty Mayonnaise. I love this story. Constance Schulman, how did you get her?
A number, if not all the characters, I could hear them in my head. And we did a huge casting, brought a zillion people. But Patty was special. And the TV is on, I'm getting ready to go to work, a commercial. And ironically, this seems impossible, but it was a mayonnaise, Kraft mayonnaise. And there was this girl, the waitress at a diner, comes walking in and starts talking. And I just went, that's the voice. That is Patty. My wife, Lisa, goes, well, I teach aerobics, and she's in my class.
Are you serious? I didn't know that part of the story.
And so we connected through Connie to her agent and started talking instantly. It was love at first sound of her voice, which she brought to that character.
Doug was one of 3 shows that Nickelodeon would have put under its new brand called Nicktoons, the other 2 being Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy. Can you explain to my audience why the idea of Nicktoons was kind of a risk at first? Or a lot of people might be thinking, oh, why did Nickelodeon just make their own stuff? Why do they have to buy it from somewhere else?
That's a great question, because it uncovers a piece of brilliance. And you have to take your mind back to those days, that what Saturday Morning Cartoons was making A lot of it was coming out of LA and overseas. And it was stuff that they used the phrase, it was something that was pre-sold. It would be Mutant Ninja Turtles, Where's Waldo. It was those kind of things that had life in books and other games and whatever. And then it became logical next step in a series. Flip that on its ear. You would get to toys. You would eventually get to all that stuff, but you flip it where you come in with a show that no one has ever heard of, made by a creator no one knows, and give it time. Let kids find it, fall in love with it, follow it.
Okay, I'm sorry to keep popping in, but this is important to the story. Before Nicktoons, Nickelodeon did show cartoons, but they were acquired from other companies. In other words, Nickelodeon bought what was already available. They didn't make it themselves. So when Nick said they were making Nicktoons, they really were making something different.
It was a unique, very risky thing to do. And I give a lot of that credit to Vanessa Coffey in particular. I know that Jerry Laybourne was supportive of that, of course. Nicktoons was very special.
Well, let me ask you, what were your initial thoughts on like shows like Rugrats, for example?
Well, Vanessa picked three. Of course, each one of them has had their own path. Three, in their own unique way, ended up being very strong. Doug, in that block, was the first. And Vanessa Coffey will describe her do this, that she thought of it as serving kids a breakfast on Saturday morning. Doug really was more of the good-for-you, nutritious part of your breakfast. I forgot what she said about Rugrats, but that Ren and Stimpy was that the dessert at the end of the meal. It was a little bit of everything. And like I said, they all had their own paths. Doug actually turned out, of the three, to be the one that was slow and steady, where things like Ren and Stimpy just went bang.
On that note, was Doug a hit from the very start?
It did fine. It was definitely something that got a lot of attention. But like I just said, it was, in terms of comparing it to the other, it was considered the slower growing. I'm grateful they continued to give it a shot.
When did you know that Doug was a hit?
Yes. Well, like I said, it was a big splash to begin with. It was definitely something that, if you were paying attention to media at all during those times. But in terms of it being a hit, that's what snagged me. I always felt like we were in third position and not really considered a hit yet. And I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know that the whole thing with Disney would happen later. I believed in what it was, but it would take time.
I see what you're saying. Doug ran for 4 seasons on Nickelodeon. I remember there was a time when, I remember the commercial very well, when Nickelodeon would say, it's on every day. Definitely seen every episode of the Nickelodeon series. One thing I want to mention before we go to the Disney part of the story, I remember being in Mexico the summer of 1995 visiting family, and I remember them showing it on television in Mexico. Where's the farthest place you've heard Doug being shown?
It went around, definitely the western part of Europe, went very far and wide. The most fun, I'll just share it with you, one of the most fun moments of the Doug story was we sent our stuff over to Korea to be animated, write the stories, layouts, and then we would send that creative package to friends in Korea, physically animated. David Campbell became one of the executive producers with me. Flew to Seoul, Korea, which was a pain, that's just hard. But we met with the president of the company we were working with, and he meets us at the airport, and he's just the most charming guy I've ever met. Kind, and he wanted to carry our bags for us. Kind of guy you felt comfortable being with from the moment we met. He, at one point while we were in a car, traffic was horrible, so we had a lot of talking time in cars, but he said at one point, Jim, do you know who Doug reminds me of? He went, me. It reminds me of my childhood. Oh,
wow.
That meant everything. Just to hear that from a guy from the other side of the world meant a lot to me.
Doug went for 4 seasons on Nickelodeon, but season 5 happened on ABC. Can you explain what happened there? It went to Disney. We have to talk about it at some point.
The discussion was always that they would make 65 half hours. 65 is sort of the conventional number you make of shows. You would have enough episodes that you could run it all the days of the week. That was the expectation. I just didn't want Doug to ever just die. It was included in our agreement that if Nickelodeon chose not to make 65 half hours within a certain period of time, we would have the ability to take it elsewhere.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now back up. We're waiting for the final season of Doug to happen to make 65. And there was this little delay going. Now remember, we've got a studio going, we've got people that really know how to make Doug, and we have all these relationships waiting to hear, are you going to rehire me? Do I have a job? And I kept saying to Vanessa, she kept putting off the answer, and finally we were having a scheduled dinner together, and I showed up at her office, and she said, well, the news is we're not going to pick you up in the last 13 episodes. I didn't see that coming. And it was like stabbing in the heart. We weren't ready for that. And so it was devastating. You think it's the worst thing that will ever happen to you. You were so upset. And you don't realize now we're sitting here talking and I'm telling this story. It turns out to be one of the most wonderful, exciting things that could possibly happen. But I didn't know that. What we didn't know was with this story goes over about 2 years. Disney is picking up momentum under Michael Eisner's leadership. They were acquiring a lot of stuff where they bought ESPN, they bought ABC, and so now they've got distribution place for programming, and they knew that Saturday morning block was important. The executive from Disney scheduled a lunch with David and myself. There's a guy named Dean Valentine. Great guy. A lot of common interests and sense of humor, and from that meeting within just months, it turned into Disney acquiring Jumbo Picture. And it was exciting, super exciting.
It seems like you were very excited to go to Disney, but did you want to leave Nickelodeon?
You never want to leave. The worst thing you can do with the show is move it. You want people to find the show. That means they know what network it's on, the time of the week it's on, and what time of the day it's on. So no, we told Nickelodeon every step of the way what was happening, that we had the right to move it. It's just they did not act on it.
Well, a lot of people dream of going to broadcast TV. Were you thinking, no, Doug would have been better off just staying on the same channel it premiered on?
This specific case is no, it would not, because Nickelodeon was not at that point committed to Doug. They were not picking up the episode. They were not promoting it. They were trying to catch up with Ren and Stimpy's popularity, and Rats was catching up, and new shows were coming up to speed, Rocko's Modern Life, and all the things that would come after the first three. So I did not get an impression after repeated meetings with Nickelodeon that they were really going to support us in our company. And it was the opposite with Disney. They were all in.
Talking about the Disney version, there were some changes. Doug is older. Billy West, unfortunately, did not return. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I wish Billy and I could talk about it, because I think there might be some hard feelings there. But that was heartbreaking. And I would say this is a case where I think a lot of times various actors and voiceover folks, whatever, you have management around you to negotiate for you and guide you. Well, Billy had that. We were not meeting with Billy. It was with his management. And Billy was moving to LA. And I think there was an enormous amount of momentum going that way, doing a lot of stuff, including both Ren and Stimpy on that show. But his management, it's maybe too much detail, that what they asked for, what they required for us to be able to keep Billy, was going against what I wanted to do to be fair, not just to Billy, but to all the voiceover people. I wanted this feeling of equality, and they were not interested on Billy's behalf.
Is that right? Okay.
Well, then we can't do this. Given what you're asking that you're going to require that we do, we're not capable of delivering that. You walked out of that meeting going, what are we going to do? But it was hard.
I do appreciate you telling me that story. Where did you find Tom McHugh?
Again, we did a lot of auditioning and whatever, and Tom, an up-and-coming actor, very, very talented man. He showed how I'm thinking life is about change. And kids at that age, you're just on the threshold of puberty. We were going to make Doug go from 11 and a half years old to 12 and a half. Your voice starts to change a little bit.
So I guess it worked out, right?
Yes, exactly.
I rewatched the first episode of the Disney Doug, and I thought it was so funny how you actually addressed the voice change.
Yes.
A lot of shows probably would shy away from doing that,
A show like back in my childhood days, but they just one day a new guy walked into the room.
That's right.
And they acted like it was a normal day.
A lot of shows do that. It can get kind of awkward. You can't really just write off the husband,
My favorite thing about that was having Doug, when he finally appears, he's got elderly hair.
That's right. I love the Nickelodeon Doug, and I love the Disney version of Doug. I felt like it was a good show that got even better, honestly. That was honestly my opinion. I know there was some criticism from people my age. Some people say, the Disney version wasn't, I've always disagreed with that. Do you maybe want to address the criticism?
Yeah.
I loved them both. I'm not just saying that to you. I loved them both.
Well, I appreciate it. I love that people have an opinion about that. There was going to be change. A lot of people actually said, look how Disney messed up Doug. I made those choices. Disney said, what do you want to do? And now we had a chance to come in and tell stories in a new way. The writers just wanted so bad to have more time to write their stories. So I asked that the stories be 24 minutes long. That's a big change in how a story is going to feel. But it gave the writers a whole new approach to how they would write the show. Even the changes in the backstory. Roger's family getting rich would change the joke. And Roger's way of handling that is just an example. The relationships in general, but Doug and Pat, it becomes a deeper relationship that they talk about. That's probably because they are on the threshold of hormones. And
one thing I did hear somebody in the YouTube comments say a while back was that the good thing about the Disney version was you kind of opened more stories for like some of the background characters. Was that your idea too?
Sure. All these things, when I say my idea, we worked with great writers. They brought their wit, intelligence, complexity, new characters were being created by now. They knew the Doug universe.
One thing you got to do with Disney that you didn't get to do with Nickelodeon was you got to make a movie. You got to make a Doug movie. How did you feel when you were going to get a movie?
It began with, this was back when home video was a big deal. So there was a whole industry of making all kinds of shows, and typically they were lower budget than what a feature film would be. Disney asked us to come up with a Doug direct-to-video movie. And so it would be on a limited budget. We were in the process of making that. We used all the people that make the regular series. Through all of this, Michael Eisner had not come to visit our studio. And he came to visit us, and then we walked back to my office, and he goes, well, the Doug movie's going to go theatrical. Emotionally, I just kind of went, how does that work? And he saw that panic in my eyes and went, it's okay, we got you. They took the Doug direct-to-video and took it into their wheelhouse, the feature film department. And we looked at the scenes that would not work on a big screen. You have a panic scene, and it's done for a little screen, and you put it on a big screen, it goes...
Oh, is that right?
All those were replaced, and the soundtrack was replaced with an orchestral, big, feature film sound.
It was a box office success because, it was done with a lower budget than your typical feature film. I remember that I went to go see it, so you can be for certain that I went to go see it. I probably saw it at the Dollar Theater, but I did go see it, though. The critics were critical. It seems to be the case, whenever they make a movie, for kids, though, that the critics always have something to say about that. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently?
I'd say that's a partial story. Yes, there were some critical things said about it. There were some amazingly powerful things said about it. One of the guys in LA, one of the newspaper guys, gave it a huge review, and at the end of it said something like, let your kids take you to see them. It just depends on how you want to look at stuff like that. I would love it to have made, Titanic money.
I love that, man.
But that didn't happen, but the movie happened.
Yeah, it made money, and I'm glad you said that there were a lot of positive things that, people did say about it. I pulled up the clip of, at the movies with Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert, he has his opinion, you know what I mean? The thing I liked was that his guest host said, I actually liked it, and I think people should go see it. He's like, it was very gratifying to see that kids still enjoyed that. If Roger Ebert, dissed my movie, I would just wear that as a trophy. I would say, Roger Ebert didn't like my movie. I made it. That's what I would say.
But to me, much more important than any of that was what Doug always was intended to be. That was this gift to kids. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, well, the movie made money, as far as I know, it was a hit. It was a hit, in my opinion. You went on to do other shows. You went to do Stanley, JoJo's Circus, Pinky Dinky Doo. Let's talk a little bit about Allegra's Window. Do you prefer doing like a live-action show, or do you prefer doing an animated show?
In animation, the old way animation gets made is something that is on this sort of conveyor belt, and live action is more in the moment and dynamic. Where if the scene isn't working, you can actually go cut and go, that's not working, let's try this, do it again, and it happens. It's just a different rhythm to it. Working with puppets and all that, Allegra's Window would be about as close to us creating a show that was like Sesame Street that inspired me from the beginning. But it's hard work. You have a lot of personalities that you're dealing with. There's real live actors, and I'm glad we got to make it.
I enjoyed Allegra's Window. I was like 4 or 5, I would watch it, right before I had to leave for kindergarten. Honestly, even the theme song, I was rewatching the theme song on YouTube maybe a few years back, and I was getting all these really warm memories, like, oh my god, I had the best childhood with what I watched on TV, you know what I mean? And PB&J Otter too, that was another one of my favorite shows you did. I think I noticed about like PB&J Otter, Allegra's Window and Doug's, they weren't like musicals, but they had a very musical feel to them. You said that you're not a musician, but do you consider yourself a person that listens to a lot of music?
Absolutely. And I continue to make playlists. That has never ended. I love it. I would love it if I had the ability to be musical myself. I'm a huge appreciator of it. I know its power.
So I guess I should ask, lately, what have you been doing at the moment, creative-wise? What have you been working on?
There's lots and lots of little ideas in various levels of collaboration. We have nothing in production right now. And I would say, I'm going to guess that my days of making series is over. A new generation has more than come in. The outlets I look for are other places where there's just as much need. Tell stories to kids and family, and to hopefully be funny and entertaining. I will give you one specific. We live in western mountains of North Carolina. We are surrounded by country that was possessed by Cherokee Indians. Of course, I'm not going to go through all that history, but it's pretty dark history. But the eastern band of the Cherokee Nation is not far from here. And I've been wanting to make a connection there and learn their story. Not tell stories for them, but to learn what they have, to have them tell their stories. And that's been going on for the last 2 years. And so, oh wow, making friends there, the enormous, exciting pleasure of getting to know them, their world, their point of view, encouraging them, watching their creative ideas flow. And so that's been something I'm extremely interested in.
Sure, very good, yeah. Having created a show like Doug, how did that change your life?
Doug took me places I've never dreamed of being able to go, both in terms of storytelling. It took us around the world. In that we're looking back on it a lot now, very reflective and appreciate more than ever. It really was a 1 in a billion shot. And it happened repeatedly with other shows that we got to make. And I'm grateful and happy to do it and thrilled that a lot of it's still out there available. It definitely changed me in every way.
And how does it feel that people are still talking about it?
It amazes me. The conversations I get in with folks like yourself who want to reminisce, want to talk about what it meant to them or continues to mean to them. That level of conversation has gotten deeper over the years. In fact, during the making of it, you'd find somebody that was a fan and they'd say stuff, questions like, when is Doug going to kiss Patty? That's never asked anymore. It's deeper stuff about what Doug meant to them and their maturing, growing up in ways that sometimes are beyond words. And that to me it's amazing to share that.
And do you still watch cartoons?
Yes.
Yeah. Any good recommendations you got?
Well, I'm going back and watching Bob's Burgers.
Oh, you like Bob's Burgers? Wow.
I started watching it for the first episode just to watch how it evolved.
Yeah.
Our family watching the Hill.
Yeah, well, like I said, you have a very good legacy, and people are going to be talking about you for a long time.
So much. Fun ride.
Oh, well, thanks again. Let me turn off the camera, and then we'll talk, all right? Jim Jinkins. What a man. I gotta be honest with you, we talked for about 90 minutes, and the entire time, he was all smiles. So with that being said, I say go ahead and rewatch Doug, and any other show you grew up watching. You might find that a lot of them really do stand the test of time, and some of them, well, not so much. And that is the Wrangles angle on that one. So a big special thanks to Jim Jinkins, whose work really does stand the test of time. And if you like today's episode, you'll also love my interview with 90s game show host Greg Lee, host of the 90s game show, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? You'll also be surprised to know that Greg Lee was also the mayor on Doug. Yeah, you might not have known that. So go ahead and look for that on my channel. So don't forget, we got more videos for you to watch on YouTube and Facebook. Remember, either way, it's .com/WranglesAngle. And when you're there, don't forget to hit subscribe, because we got more videos for you on the way, including food videos, including more interview episodes, because I know a lot of people say they love it when I do interviews. So stay tuned for that. And don't forget, we finally got Wrangles Angle t-shirts. t-shirts. That's right, Ko-fi.com/WrangleZangle is the only place to get official Wrangle Zangle merchandise like the official Wrangle Zangle t-shirt. And when you're there, don't forget that you can also leave me a cash donation because Wrangle Zangle's free, and I like it that way. Remember that your purchases and donations help me to make more of the content you love. So consider leaving me a one-time or monthly donation today. And yes, monthly donations can be canceled at any time. It's all waiting for you at Ko-fi.com/WrangleZangle. That's ko-fi.com/WrangleZangle. And we got new designs for t-shirts coming soon in 2024, so stay tuned for that. But before we go, before you watch more of my videos, you know, Doug had a lot of very funny moments, some of which you might not even appreciate till you get older. So of course I have to bother Jim with my favorite Doug memories. Hopefully I didn't stretch it too long. We'll see you next time, folks. Take it easy. Before I let you go, let me tell you a few of my favorite Doug memories. From the Disney version, when they were going to buy tickets to see the Beats, I cannot remember his name, the like surfer dude guy, the big guy.
Spunky Boma.
Exactly. And then remember then they finally open up the ticket booth? Oh man, I forgot my money. The banging on the trash can episode, that's a very iconic episode. Doug was imagining himself being interviewed, and then they're like, so how do you write songs? And they grabbed a plunger, and he's like, yeah, plunger, what? When Doug lost his journal and he was trying to find an alternative, and then he grabs toilet paper, he's like, dear toilet paper. Is there any other ones? Everybody was watching a show that was like 90210, Teen Heart Street. The Dylan Farnham look, you know what I mean? Yeah. When he went to the mall and the guy says, here, let me show you some clothes. Doug's like, no, this looks like something my dad wore in college, you know what I mean? But the part when then he puts him in like a leisure suit, much like John Travolta wore. And then he's like, disco business, shake your booty. And then Doug's like, I don't want to shake my booty. That alone made me laugh so hard.
But disqualified.